What's going on, everybody? It is overreaction time once again. I am your host, Simon Simano, and look who we have making his triumphant debut on ORT. It is none other than the fight analyst, Dan Tom. DT, what is up, my man? How you doing?
Dude, it's so good to join you, and feels like it's a good week to join. We'll see. I don't want to react too quickly here, but it feels like a poppin' week to say the least, Simon.
You think we got something important to talk about this week, Dan? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, it's a UFC pay-per-view week. Of course that's what I'm leaning to, but I'm sure there's other stuff you could probably, I don't know, grab out of the air. But I'll let you decide. So many topics as per usual. I would imagine as we cover the game, I should say, that never sleeps.
Yeah. Well, I am not going to run from the scene of this episode, so let's get it popping. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's party.
All right, Kamikaze, you know what time it is. Hit it.
I mean, guys, what are you fucking? Is this tonight's stupid question night? Are you guys that fucking stupid? You can't be that fucking stupid. Who gives a shit? One of the dumbest things I've ever read in my life. Fucking common sense. Everybody knows that.
All right, Dan, here we go. As you mentioned, there is UFC 317 this week, but we have something else to talk about. Something that we've talked about very often on the show, and that is Jon Jones. Our long national nightmare is over. We now have resolution to Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. The fight is not happening, and that's because on Saturday at the UFC Baku post-fight press conference, 12 minutes into it, after somebody asked a question about the status of Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall, that's when Dana White decided to drop the bomb on us that Jon Jones called him up and he has retired from MMA. So we are not getting Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. He has retired. We found out from Dana White, not from Jon Jones himself. Now, this comes at the same time that Jon Jones finds himself stuck in another legal situation. In Albuquerque, the PD reporting, the Albuquerque Journal, reporting that Jon Jones fled the scene of an accident where a half-naked woman was in his car. A lot of really weird details in that report, which we can touch on here. But let me go ahead now and hit you with this, Dan. Jon Jones retiring while he faces another legal issue is the most Jon Jones thing ever.
It is, man. It is. And as much as I want to get in on that celebration, I will say maybe we should add the caveat that this chapter is over because let's face it, Simon, Jon Jones plays life like I used to play Monopoly as a child. You're just taking the car, you're skirting past all the hotels. You probably load the get out of jail free cards like extra when Jon Jones plays because he seems to have like unlimited amounts of those, Simon. I'm talking both like literally and figuratively as far as the sport we cover, right?
Yep. Second chances.
So,
I mean, dude, I can you believe it ends like this, though, for Jon Jones? This is the guy that a lot of people call the GOAT, and it ends not with Jon Jones announcing it. It's not this grandiose thing. Dana White completely buried the lead, right? He didn't even bring it up at the very top of the press conference. That's the news. That's what matters. It comes up in Baku, Azerbaijan, of all places, with a question 12 minutes into it. What a weird ending to the career of Jon Jones, right?
yeah, it's that like Pirates of the Caribbean meme where the guys are like got the nooses around their neck, and I think it's like Orlando Bloom or something going, oh, first time. Like I pictured Stipe Miocic up there because Simon, to your point, remember what they did to Stipe in the underrated card, granted, but it took place in the middle of the night in like Shenzhen, China or something like last year, and they announced the Stipe retirement. Like, weren't we building up Stipe and like he was at least getting some residual past due, granted respect for that long promotion that we had to wait for with the Jones and Stipe. And then all of a sudden, as soon as the fight happens, like, yeah, here's your post thing, in China, in the middle of the night. This one, though, you could argue there was strategy to it, right? With the, burying of the lead, like you said. Obviously, even somebody as checked out as Dana White seems to be these days, hard to imagine he didn't know that, right? Right, Simon? I mean, you've been in this game, for a minute, obviously. I mean, you know these things. Hard to imagine someone didn't let him know that, right?
I mean, listen, dude, my sort of theory, put my tinfoil hat on here, is that ultimately Dana White buries the lead there because he's embarrassed by what's played out for the last several months. I mean, He guaranteed that Jon Jones was going to fight Tom Aspinall back in December. He made a guarantee, and then he doubled down and tripled down and quadrupled down and made all the reassurances that it was going to happen. I think ultimately Dana White is like the ostrich with his head in the sand, you know, like, man, like, yeah, I got to tell you guys about this, but I'm not going to lead with it. That's ultimately what I think, man. Like, he's got to be embarrassed by what just transpired.
Absolutely. And, I will say I was glad that he mentioned the, Tom Aspinall, part of it all, as far as, taking care of him. We don't really hear that. That was the old school Dana. I'll take care of these guys. I'll make it up to you, crowd. I'll make it up. You don't really hear Dana do that much anymore. And in his defense, he actually did do that. So I'm hoping for Aspinall's sake, that means he still makes Jon Jones type money in his next fight, regardless of who they put him against. But yeah, I agree with what you said there.
Yeah. All right, man. Now, we're not done talking about Jon Jones. We've got a lot of angles to talk about with Jon Jones, all right? And this is another angle I'm going to come at you with. And that's the fact that this Tom Aspinall fight's not happening, which is a huge bummer. It is a huge bummer for the fans. It's a bummer for the UFC, right? It's a big letdown. We just talked about Dana White, guaranteed it back in December, double, triple, quadruple down, reassurances. It ultimately doesn't happen. If you, if you believe the reporting from Ariel Helwani, which there's really no reason not to, he's pretty accurate with this stuff. The UFC came correct with the money that Jon Jones wanted, is what it sounds like. And ultimately, Jon Jones just didn't want to fight Tom Aspinall. And so really, man, I have no choice but to hit you with this one right here, Dan. Jon Jones clearly ducked Tom Aspinall because he knew he couldn't handle him.
So this is interesting. And, I'm going to say that's not an overreaction. In fact, not only will I, agree with it, so it's not boring. We're not just agreeing when we agree here, which won't be the case always. I don't know what's coming at me, folks, but I will add to it, right? So to kind of give you something on that, which is
give it to me.
Okay. Yes, I agree. You laid out the facts there perfectly. That I don't want to, even retouch it with what Ariel said. And if we're assuming that reporting is correct, then yeah, I mean. It's pretty black and white. And I will add that I also bring in, somebody who's watched the sport for a minute, as you, Simon. Perhaps we have that bias, but I would say it's a good bias. I mean, you would hope that, we have some recollection of these things covering the sport and all. And yeah, I remember, watching Jones, play the cycle of life in MMA as the young lion. And now that it's his turn to give back, and we saw this with the reluctant, defenses, even at light heavyweight over a half decade ago, we saw the inactivity for many reasons. Granted, there were legal reasons then too, but even with negotiations, they weren't easy. He did not seem excited to come to the table even after the fights were signed. He got out of a lot of those fights off the skin of his teeth, with the Dominic Reyes one in particular, but even the Thiago Santos one, mind you, could have been scored against him, folks. And I think he's Jones, and say what you will about Jones, and you could call me a Jones hater. One thing I always compliment him on, Simon, is his strategic intelligence in the fight game. Now, I specifically said strategic in the fight game with intelligence, because I can't just use the word intelligence with the choices he's made. And I'm not being
absolutely not. I don't blame you.
Right. But when we're talking about strategic intelligence in the fight game, this guy's always had that, man. He's always had that self-preservation. Even guys, the air quotes blown up middleweights he fought and beat, even on short notice, he wouldn't take those guys like Chael Sonnen had a whole event canceled. What was it? UFC 152, 150 something, folks, right? It's been going on for a while, to put it mildly. So when you look at someone's serial behavior, as I do, I analyze fights, right, Simon? I got to look at these fighters' tendencies. Like, I can't help but notice like other tendencies, not just how they throw their jab, right? And I would argue that his tendencies also support your statement. So no, that's not an overreaction.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, I think the people who disagree with me on this, who may be watching and who will see this, listen, let me just lay it out for you like this. I said last week, I believe it was on this show or a couple weeks ago on this show, that when it was looking like Jon Jones wasn't going to fight Tom Aspinall, I believe the wording I used was he's not going to fight him because he's too afraid to lose, right? Like, Jon Jones wasn't going to risk his legacy against the guy that he thought he could lose against. Doesn't mean he's afraid of Tom Aspinall, but like I'm telling you right now, he knew he couldn't handle him. He knew he couldn't handle him. And people might say, well, he fought Cyril Gane. Well, he fought Cyril Gane 2 years ago. Okay, it beat Cyril Gane at heavyweight. 2 years ago in March of 2023. He was 2 years younger with like 2 or 3 fewer surgeries on his body, right?
Mhm.
I mean, so that's one thing. And obviously that was coming off of the heels of Francis Ngannou, vacating the title, which I'm sure we'll touch on coming up here in another segment. Hint, hint. But anyways, so listen, yes, he gets credit for beating Cyril Gane, but it was 2 years ago. He could have fought Tom Aspinall in 2020, in November of 20. Wait, now my years are all messed up here, dude. He could have fought Stipe the first time, but then he blew out his pec.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
But the fight didn't even make sense. He could have fought Tom Aspinall then. They could have unified then, or he could have fought Tom Aspinall as the number 1 contender then, right? Like it didn't even make sense to fight Stipe at that point. And then we waited an extra year to get the Stipe fight. I think Jon realized after being in there with Stipe at this point, he realizes that he just couldn't handle a younger Tom Aspinall who's going to come at him strong, right? Like you can break it down, Dan. I'd love for you to break down what you think this fight would have looked like, but I'd imagine Tom Aspinall was going to bring some speed, some quickness. Jon Jones realizes that he may not have the same speed and quickness. Yes, he's got fight IQ. We know that through the roof, but like, could he handle a blitz from Tom Aspinall potentially? Because that's what he's been doing. That's the part where I think Jon Jones thought twice and was like, nah, I'm not going to finish my legacy losing to this guy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because I didn't even get to the heavyweight part of the patterns, right? Because in between that time and the time I just said was the whole Ngannou thing. I mean, we can go back and find articles on MMA Junkie of me writing, fantasy fights between them back in like 2021, right?
Yeah.
Like that's almost a half decade at this point. And then we get into the chapter, like you said, Simon, and yeah, he could have fought him then too, to add to that, serial behavior. And to answer your question, as far as how I would have saw that, I believe odds already had Tom as the favorite. I would have both lined him as the favorite and picked him. Now, I admittedly picked Cyril Gane against him. Now, in my defense, Cyril Gane was also favored, meaning I wasn't alone for whatever that's worth. And he wasn't heavily favored. And in my defense, I wasn't heavily confident, nor am I about most heavyweight fights. The pick was predicated on the deterioration of Jon Jones wrestling that we arguably were already seeing from the light heavyweight days. Now, thankfully, there's only like 3 people that can wrestle at heavyweight, and I don't know if we need to take one of those numbers down. I love you, Curtis Blades, but he's been struggling to be the wrestler that we all thought, and he himself rightfully claimed to be. And yeah, the division has been terrible. It's one of the regress divisions, and nobody can grapple. And again, Jones is smart. He did what he had to do, but the Jones of old would go strength for strength with these guys, right, Simon?
Yep.
That was kind of his like MO. He would be well studied, he would be strategic, but he would also still go strength for strength. That was one of the first times where we saw Jon Jones. We've had opponents like crumble, like Gane did before, whether it was Brandon Vera, who would kind of show that trend in certain matchups. Same with Ryan Bader, who would later go on and show that trend in certain matchups. Yeah. Again, when Bader would meet another like ferocious athlete, whether it was Anthony Rumble Johnson or Renan Fajeda, right? Like it was, and I love Ryan Bader, but let's be honest, that's what happened.
Yep.
And back to your point, I think Jon Jones knew that it was his turn in the cycle of life to play that role.
Cycle of life,
now he had to be the smaller, the smaller, older, right? Not in his prime. We never have to see that role, and Jon Jones, knows all his haters have been salivating to finally see, all right, this game comes around for everybody. Are you going to Khabib it out of town, or are you going to stick around and allow what happened to everybody else to happen? And no, he did not. He did not, man. He did not.
He did not. No, I mean, I just think Jon Jones came to a realization. He's been playing that like, oh, this guy doesn't excite me card. He's kind of been playing that card for a while, right? He played it with like that third wave, I guess you would say, of light heavyweight contenders. Like he wasn't really thrilled to fight like a Thiago Santos or a Dominic Reyes, right? That's how he was talking then. And that's how he's been talking about Tom Aspinall. But the fight built so much that the fight had to happen. And do you ultimately land that it's a shame that it's not happening, Dan? Like, is it a shame that this fight is not happening?
It is a shame for the divisional health. And for the numbers, I know everyone's joking like, it was only going to do all this for what, 400K buys, which is sad when you think about a guy like BJ Penn, who's in the news for really bad stuff. Like that guy's average was 400K buys, like pre-social media for the UFC. Right. Just to put in perspective for everybody's like, the UFC is way better today. I'm like, is it? The heavyweights are worse. the numbers are worse.
Yeah.
You know, the
Yeah.
hardcore fans are gone. And yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to tangent off on your question there, but yeah.
No, it's just one of those things where I'm just like, the whole idea that Tom Aspinall didn't excite him was just bullshit the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, he hasn't had a bigger fight. You know, he hasn't had a bigger fight since the Daniel Cormier fight in 2017. You know what I mean? Like, all due respect, like the Cyril Gane fight wasn't that big. The Stipe fight, obviously, we knew how that was going to go. Wasn't that big. Yeah, I understood Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith didn't exactly, you know, excite him, you know. And we weren't all that up for Alexander Gustafsson rematch because we kind of saw Alexander Gustafsson on the decline, you know. So like this was the big fight for him to make, to go off on and finish his career. It's just a damn shame that it's not going to happen. And I'm upset about it, but what is what it is.
It is, especially, you know, for those who've been following the sport. It seems to happen at heavyweight, right? Like these big fights that never happened, back from the Randy Fedor, right? And then, you know, we again, the Ngannou, more relevant Ngannou Jones, and now Jones Aspinall. It's just the heavyweight division, really, as much as I give it crap, it does. I give it crap because it deserves better. It deserves better than what it's been getting, man. And to see that at the top is really disheartening.
Yeah, for sure, man. All right. Well, we're going to talk about Jon Jones one more time, and now we're going to touch on legacy, Dan Tom, because the career is over. All right, the career is over. And so, listen, I don't have to recap the career for you. You know what the career looks like in the cage. You know what the career looks like outside the cage. You know what it all looks like for the last 15 years or so with Jon Jones. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hit you with this right now, man. Jon Jones can't possibly be the GOAT, because now he has 2 asterisks on his resume.
Jon Jones can't possibly be the GOAT because he has 2 asterisks on his resume.
You already know what the first one. You already know what the first asterisk was. The second one is the fact that this fight's not happening.
Yeah, absolutely. He leaves it untied and ununified and underwhelming. I'm trying to be technical though, because I would say that it's not an overreaction, but I'm holding you to your word, Simon. Now, based on those 2 things alone, the positive tests and whatnot. Now, for me, I'm going to be a little contrarian here.
Hit me with it.
Based on those 2 things alone, he is not the greatest on time.
Greatest of all time.
Okay, I would say that even though I personally would agree with you, I would say that there's still an argument if we're just basing it off those 2 things. I don't agree with that argument, but I'm only saying that is because I'm already seeing people online try to trump these arguments, right? With the he didn't need to fight Aspinall. His greatness was secured 5 years ago, right? And if you're saying his greatness is secured 5 years ago, that's also a hard one to argue, even as a air quote somebody labeled as a Jon Jones hater, because, you know, he did do all of the stuff that one could consider great before then. That is a technically correct / not outlandish statement. Okay.
So if I understand, wait, real quick. So if I understand, you're saying the people are saying his greatness was secured 5 years ago. So after the Dominic Reyes win, after the Dominic Reyes fight, that was 5 years ago, right?
And I'm sure they would even argue before that, right? And let's leave that door open. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt here. Okay. And if they're saying that, Simon, I'm assuming that means they're okay with the drug stuff, right? That one could only assume.
You would have to assume they're okay with that.
And that's where I have trouble, because as much as I do put that on the scale on weighing it against them, it is a valid stone to throw on that scale, Simon. Absolutely. That being said, I don't want to be a hypocrite and apply the drug things to the fighters I like and the fighters I don't, because a lot of people do that. It's our inherent bias as humans. And I got to say, if I'm going to stick to my Nick Diaz thing and say Jon Jones avoided the hitters, but also stick to the same Nick Diaz reference I'm citing here and be like, everyone's on steroids.
Sure.
Because I believe as manic as Nick was in that courthouse video, I agree with him. He did take on the hitters, unlike guys like the Joneses of the world, right? You know, and I know he was officially scheduled to face Rumble Johnson, but again, he didn't seem too quick to take that fight either. Back in those days, which is an extra unfortunate. R.I.P. Anthony Rumble there. But yeah, I can't say that I hold it against the drug things, because again, at the same time, even though I hold GSP high because he's like the teacher's pet, so to speak, of this list, at the same time, I'm not. If you told me that if it came out somehow, I'm not allegedly, right? I'm not saying this is not the truth.
Yeah, but we
let's just
can't
say,
get into the hypothetical world there, can we? We have
no,
facts on Jon Jones.
no. I'm just saying that if it did somehow, would I be surprised, Simon? No, I would not be, because again, I believe they're all on steroids. So if I believe they're all on steroids, then I can't come too hard at the crowd. That would be like, oh, that asterisk, Simon. No, his greatness was already secured. They're all on steroids. The picograms as well. You know, it wasn't known then, but it's shown that it's kind of been BS science. And you know what? I think a lot of that stuff is BS science too, so they can get a paycheck, because I am not a fan of those governing bodies of USADA. So again, if I'm going to keep that same energy, Simon,
okay,
you know what? I'm gonna say that based on those two things alone, it's an overreaction. But if you want to talk about the other things in his legacy, and I'm not even like getting into like the outside of the octagon stuff, I would say that weighs more. Because
well,
to me,
let me tell you what I have a problem with Jon Jones as the GOAT. All right. If somebody wanted to label Jon Jones the most talented fighter in UFC history, I don't think I'm going to argue with that. Okay. I understand what Jon Jones looked like in the cage. My eyes didn't deceive me. I understand what he looked like when he burst onto the scene, and before he was 30 years old. I understood what Jon Jones looked like. All right. And he looked like something we'd never seen before. Long limbs, athletic, movements, striking creativity, fight IQ. Like, wow, how would anybody, get by this guy? Problem I have now, man, is we have an entire body that goes until now. Okay. We got to include these last 5 years. All right.
Yep.
And here's what I will say. What I have an issue with anybody who considers Jon Jones the GOAT, the greatest of all time. This guy was stripped of the belt, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Stripped for the hit and run way back when. Stripped for the cocaine positive drug test. Stripped for PED use and a positive performance enhancing suspension. Had another performance enhancing suspension that was then excused as picograms. And now that's in our lexicon forever because of Jon Jones. The sport, the industry, the promotion made excuses for this guy time and time after again. If you were to compare him to GSP, which I don't want to necessarily make this a GSP versus Jon Jones thing, but because GSP is my personal GOAT, you don't have all those things. You don't have all those asterisks hanging over his head. How could the GOAT of our sport be stripped of his championship 3 times, have multiple failed drug tests? And oh, by the way, probably, I will say definitively, myself, I believe, lost that fight to Dominic Reyes. Those judges got it wrong, and I don't care what anybody says. Judges got that fight wrong. He lost that fight. And then I'll also say this. He goes to heavyweight after Francis Ngannou leaves the UFC altogether. You think that was by coincidence? He leaves. He goes to heavyweight. He takes 3 years off to bulk up and ducks Francis Ngannou after he leaves. And then we don't get this Tom Aspinall fight at the end to close it out. I'm sorry, man. But if that's your GOAT, I can't be with that. I can't rock with that at all. Go ahead. I'll give you the final word, dude. But that's what I can't rock with that at all, man.
That 100%. And obviously you're talking about, greatest of all time, that big top of the mountain generalization that everybody talks about, right?
I didn't even touch on the character issues. I didn't even touch on the character issues. So I left that out of it.
I will say, skill wise, I do think he is the greatest light heavyweight of all time. But if we're talking about greatest of all time, any kind of pound for pound variation, however you want to phrase it, right? Obviously, we're talking about the general top of the mountain list that everybody talks about here, obviously. But I'm just saying, however you want to phrase it, he doesn't even rank on the top 5. Not even the greatest. He doesn't even rank on the top 5 for me.
He ain't on the Mount Rushmore.
To be honest.
No.
And I'm not jumping on the Jon Jones. No, folks, I was a fan of this guy after watching him beat Stephan Bonner on the undercard of GSP BJ2. Like I was like, wow, who is this guy, right? The Gusama fight was buried on the prelims. At that time they didn't have access to that, so I was a fan of this guy. But I was like, oh, something's off about him. Something seems kind of fake or whatever. And I have these weird predilections. I even randomly called KGB Lee's ex cop boyfriend being an abusive Nazi. Ask the producer Danny, the old MMA Junkie radio show. I have these weird radar for these things, and I'm like, something seems fake about this guy. And then he has the first Bentley crash and all that stuff. But even leaving all that stuff out, right? The reason is, it's like you mentioned that too. It's like, he should have lost the Reyes fight, arguably lost the Santos fight. And even though not a skill or scoring issue, he probably should have lost the Anthony Smith fight and was close to losing that fight too.
Yeah, I mean that would have
You know,
been,
you look at that.
along the lines of the Hamill loss, of course, but like it would have been another loss on his record. Yes.
I mean, so we're talking about the unignorable, untied shoelaces of heavyweight. Well, let's look at the other shoe, light heavyweight. He left those shoelaces untied too, and even through his tenure, I'm not gonna like take away from the names, but I will say that it's upsetting that people don't give Anderson Silva or BJ Penn or even George St. Pierre, which is insane because welterweight was stacked back then, the same credit where they're like, no, he fought the names. And it was people that half the people weren't even around back then, Simon. And if they weren't around back then to reference what was being referenced, because what they were referencing was all the beloved pride names that carried a lot of stock, right? Even past the years, right? But even though Shogun fought until like he was like 50 years old or whatever, he was already post-prime when he fought Jon Jones. That was obviously one of his best wins. And even the Jones nut huggers never mentioned one of his best wins, in my opinion, which was actually Glover Teixeira. No one ever mentioned that. That's actually a really impressive win for Jon Jones. So was the 27 win over Daniel Cormier. But of course, that's overturned from the positive test in one of the many stripped instances you spoke about, Simon. And it was just the irony for me with Jon Jones was that like, this is the most talented guy in the world. He never needed to cheat or do any of these dirty tactics, which was the whole ironic part. Like he had the craziest reach in the division, all the skills, all those favorable matchmaking, facing old blown up middleweights. And yet he still felt the need to poke people in the eye all the time. And by the way, go watch the Hurt Locker documentary. He actually admits it. He admits to purposely doing this. And for those in the know, and John McCarthy on MMA Junkie Radio said, yeah, John outlawed me or anybody else from reffing his fights long ago. He only lets Dean in there. And what does he do every time? He pokes someone in the eye and Herb Dean goes, this is a hard warning. John, the fingers got to go like this. And then John goes, oh, yeah, really? Oh, teach me more, Dean. And we have to watch that dog and pony show every time. And you know how many points were taken away throughout that whole tenure of the IPO record holder and self-admitter? Zero. Everybody from the refs, the judges to those poor scorecards Simon mentioned, the UFC, as well as the media, right? Everybody no-toed him. Everybody no-toed this. And I'm not being a hater, folks. I stated all facts. Simon stated all facts, and the world has done enough favors for Jon Jones. We don't need to. There's going to be enough reparation media being done for him by the promotion and others.
Yep.
We don't need to add to that.
Yeah. And I will say also, too, I want to touch on one thing because I can sort of hear the comments already talking about his longevity. You've even heard Daniel Cormier praise him for his longevity, like how crazy it is that he's been the top of the game for 15 years. Excuse me. He's been not fighting for 7 of those years. 3 years because he wanted to move up to heavyweight, and then 2 self-induced suspensions. So
cherry picking.
Please shut up with the longevity thing. Even that has an asterisk to it. Longevity for the last 15 years. No, dude, 17 years or whatever it's been. No, dude, 7 years this guy didn't fight. Okay, because of shit that he couldn't control. No, because of shit that was in his control that he couldn't just do right. You know what I'm saying? So please, the longevity argument also, get out of here with that. Get out of here with that.
It's tough. Yep. And also give more respect to the lighter weight divisions, folks, kind of like boxing and stuff. The reason why they hold Sugar Ray Robinson so high, even from 70, 80, almost 100 years ago, it's starting to feel like at this point, it's because the lighter weights were generally where the skills are at. I mean, how many heavyweight slop fests do we see going to decision? Like even the betting odds, those are the fights that are scheduled to go over now. Like you got to give respect to the strength of competition of the lighter weight classes, folks. That's why Demetrius Johnson, Jose Aldo, as well as BJ Penn, by the way, who never pulled out of a fight. Say what you will about the legacy that he destroyed in the state that he's in, which is terrible now. Don't get me wrong. But in his prime, man never pulled out of a fight. Always took the fights, never missed weight, never popped, definitely wasn't on drugs. You look at that guy's physique. And he was all messed up too. But you know what?
He might have been on drugs, but not those drugs.
Yeah, exactly. He was, he wasn't letting it ruin events and people's careers and stuff, and having to making the promotion relocate events just to no-toe him like they did with Jon Jones. Man, I mean, all the favors that guy has gotten.
Really quickly, I just want to ask you: do you think Jon Jones's MMA retirement sticks? We know how this goes. Give me a quick yes or no. Yes or no? Does it stick? Does he fight again?
He does fight again.
He does fight again. All right, man. Well, shit. If that's
it could be a Jake Paul boxing event, but he does fight again.
Okay. All right. Okay. It could be a dirty boxing event. Look at that.
Yes.
His own promotion or something like that.
Yeah. There we go. There we go.
All right. Well, when that comes up, I'm sure we'll talk about Jon Jones again. But for now, we are done talking about Jon Jones. Kamikaze, we are done talking about Jon Jones. All right. No Kamikaze in the back is like, God, I've heard so much about Jon Jones since this show started. We're done, Kamikaze. All right. All right, man. Here we go now to the very last topic I want to talk about. Now we're going to move on from Jon Jones and let's just look ahead now to UFC 317 this weekend, right? And we're just going to talk about the main event because that's what we're all clamoring for at the very top, right? You know the backdrop, you know the storylines heading in here. It's Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira fighting for the vacant lightweight title. Title was vacated by Islam Makhachev, of course, who is going to move up to welterweight and is expected to get a welterweight title shot against JDM. So they are fighting for Islam's vacated title. Of course, on this show for so long, I have said how badly I want to see Ilia and Islam. We're not happening, but this is not a bad consolation prize to see Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira. It is a fight that Ilia Topuria talked about wanting several months back when he was talking about moving up to lightweight. So ultimately, I'm good with this fight and I'm excited about it. And here's what I'm thinking going into it, Dan. Ilia Topuria losing to Charles Oliveira would be a disaster.
I think that's an overreaction. It'd be a disaster for Ilia and his momentum for his legacy. Yeah. But I think that's an overreaction if we look at it. I think the perspectives are outnumbered because you've got the fan perspective, which is surprising to me as a hardcore dude Bronx fan. I feel like I used to have to like fight to get this guy respect like I do with Pantoja Simon. But no, the fans love them dude Bronx, even like the newer fans, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there'd be disappointment from there. And because the newer fans like them, and because the UFC not only is lacking names, but it's the little bit of old names that they're trying to hold on to sell these cards, whether they're good or not. Well, Charles Oliveira fits that bill, and he's good. So I think the UFC would forgive it, even though obviously the UFC at the end of the day, you could always assume that they want the younger talent from a business perspective. Like I'm not denying that, but I'm just saying
that's the other part. That's the other component to my disaster statement here, man. Like you think the UFC wants Ilia Topuria to win?
Sure,
hurts the promotion but if he doesn't.
Yeah, sure, but it's not like Moicano filling in last minute to face Makhachev. Like that would have been a disaster, right? Not that, and don't worry, Moicano stock's high, but Moicano, I mean, he's 37, he's on his way out, right? Like he's only got a couple more fights in him, probably to his own admission, I believe. I'm just saying, like, that's where, and Charles is up there too, and he doesn't have a ton of fights too, but again, he's the former champion, he's got that stock. He arguably makes it from a win-lose to a win-win, right? Now, again, I'm not going to disagree that the win is much bigger on the Ilia side. That that inside, if they were being completely honest, that the UFC would agree with you that it'd be on the Ilia side. That being said, I don't think it's that much of a disparity where we're in disaster zone, if that makes sense.
Well, for Ilia, in terms of okay, that I got you. So maybe it's a little hyperbole. This is overreaction time after all.
Sure, of course. Come
on, man.
Of course.
But maybe there's a little hyperbole there. Okay, that's fine. But you do agree it's better, it's worse if Charles wins for the UFC than it is if Ilia wins. It's worse for the UFC if Ilia loses, right? We agree there. But maybe it's not a disaster.
It is worse, yes.
But I will say this though too, from Ilia's standpoint though. I mean, Ilia's been talking up a big game. This is the guy who, after he knocked out Max Holloway, is talking about wanting to fight Conor McGregor. I could knock out Conor McGregor. This and that. He's been talking that tune for the last year, right? And so I just think, when you make a big move like this, right, and you're talking big and bold, you were talking like that, like you were going to be Islam Makhachev. Now that you don't get Islam, you don't get the actual champion, and you get the second guy on the list, you cannot afford to fail. I don't think he can afford to fail, because where does Ilia go if he were to lose this fight? Like, where does he go from here? He's got to stay on this upward trajectory. Otherwise, what? He's just going to start fighting lightweight contenders? You want to fight those guys as the champion and defending a title, not as a contender having to work your way back to the top.
Yeah, and he gambled by leaving his division and his belt and leaving his team. So you could argue if anybody's cruising for a bruising here, it's Topuria. I'm not sure if it comes here. I'm hoping that I'm wrong as a big dude Bronx fan. I would love it. But I think that would be a giant shock factor at the same time if he won, which kind of adds to your point on why this would be a really big deal if Ilia lost. Because, yeah, it would be a huge shock factor, even for those of us in the know and love Charles. We would be like, what? Because again,
it'll be amazing if Charles wins. It'll be huge. Like as a big fan of this sport, as a big fan of Do Bronx for many years, yes, it would be huge. And I know you would. I'm sure you would love it.
Of course, I would love it. But yeah, I can't say that I'm going to be picking my guy though, man, because to your point, the UFC, you know, is setting this guy up for the success that he's calling for, and that's a dangerous combination because, you know, I called Jon Jones as one of the most natural fighters I've seen. Well, Topuria is right up there as far as like natural fighters go, man.
All right. Well, that was a little teaser into what you'll get from Dan Tom later this week on MMA Junkie when he does his full breakdown. Dan, the time for overreacting has come to an end, my friend. Did we do enough of it? Did we do enough of it today?
I don't know, man. I feel like me and you were having a therapy session that we both needed at a certain point with the Jon Jones stuff. But yeah, no, I'm glad we got it off our chests. And we'll see, we'll see how people react in the comments to it. But
I feel cleansed of Jon Jones now for a while, but I'm sure something's going to come up and we're going to keep talking about this guy. But guys, everybody, I appreciate you guys for watching this long. Please, if you can, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And again, thank you to you, Dan. I appreciate having you on, and we will have you back on again for sure, my man. Look for Dan's work on MMA Junkie later this week as we preview UFC 317. And until next week on ORT, we will see you then. Dana, take us away.
MMA Junkie AI.